Baghdad, Iraq, January 1258. A city of round walls and straight canals. Perhaps 500,000 people, perhaps 1,000,000. The chroniclers disagree, and the truth burned with the tax registers. What we know is this. For 500 years, this was the capital of the Islamic world, and for part of that time, the largest city on earth outside China. It has libraries the size of palaces. It has palaces the size of districts. It has a water network so vast that a farmer on one end would never meet a farmer on the other. And in 13 days, it will cease to exist as a great city. Not for a decade, not for a century, for 700 years. Armies had threatened Baghdad before. Floods had hit it, plagues had passed through. It always came back. This time it didn't. This time something inside the city was already broken. Something built into it from the first brick.
I'm Marcus Hale, and today we're reconstructing Baghdad. Not to admire it, but to find the flaw its builders couldn't see. We're going to rebuild the city at its height, walk its streets, follow its water, and locate the exact design decision that turned the greatest city of its age into a machine for its own destruction. Then we're going to watch that machine do what it was always going to do. Stay with me. The evidence is in the canals. To understand what died in 1258, you have to see what was born in 762. Picture this. You're an engineer standing on the west bank of the Tigris River in the summer heat of central Iraq. Around you, 100,000 workers, the chronicler's figure likely inflated, but the scale was real, are digging a perfect circle into the plain. The Caliph al-Mansur, second ruler of the new Abbasid dynasty, has chosen this spot for his capital, and he has chosen its shape personally. A round city, roughly 2 kilometers across. 4 gates facing the 4 corners of his empire. Kufa to the south, Basra to the southeast, Khorasan to the northeast, Syria to the northwest. Al-Mansur called it Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace. Notice what the shape tells you. A round city has no back. No corner to hide in, no quarter more important than another. Except the center. And at the exact center of the circle, al-Mansur placed 2 buildings, the Great Mosque and his own palace, with a green dome said to rise nearly 50 meters above the plain. Every street in the round city pointed at the Caliph. The geometry was a sentence, and the sentence read, "Everything flows from here." Remember that sentence. It matters later. Why this spot? Al-Mansur's surveyors gave him the honest answer: water. The site sat between the Tigris and the Euphrates, at one of the narrowest points of the Mesopotamian plain, in a region laced with canals that were already ancient when the Abbasids arrived. The Sasanian Persian kings had spent centuries engineering this landscape. The greatest of their works, the Nahrawan Canal, ran for roughly 300 kilometers east of the Tigris, a man-made river wide enough for boats, feeding a lattice of smaller channels that turned desert into farmland. This is the machine beneath the city, and it is the single most important piece of evidence in this case. So stand in this canal for a moment. Dry season, ankle-deep water, mud brick banks rising on either side. Notice what you can't see from here. You can't see the hundreds of sluice gates upstream that meter the flow. You can't see the dredging crews that fight the silt, the Tigris carrying so much sediment that every canal in the network is slowly filling itself in. You can't see the tax offices that pay those crews, or the soldiers who protect the tax offices. The canal looks like geography. It is actually government. Every meter of it exists only as long as a strong central state maintains it. Let the dredging stop for a generation, and the channels choke. Let a dike fail unrepaired, and the fields on one side flood, while the fields on the other side die of thirst. The Sasanians understood this. Their kings counted canal maintenance among the first duties of the crown. Al-Mansur understood it too. And so he built his perfect circle on top of a life support system that demanded one thing above all: that the center hold forever. For about a century and a half, it held, and the result was one of the extraordinary episodes in human history. By the early 800s, under the Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mamun, Baghdad had exploded far beyond the round city. Suburbs sprawled along both banks of the Tigris. The markets of Kark stretched for kilometers. Paper merchants, goldsmiths, booksellers, spice traders handling goods from China, India, East Africa, and the Baltic. Estimates of the city's population vary widely. Many historians place it somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people at its 9th and 10th century peak, which would make it, by most reckonings, the largest city in the world at the time outside of China. And it wasn't just large. It was deliberately, institutionally brilliant. Al-Mamun poured money into what the sources call the Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, and into a translation movement that gathered Greek, Persian, and Indian science and rebuilt it in Arabic. Scholars in Baghdad measured the circumference of the earth. The mathematician al-Khwarizmi wrote the book that gave algebra its name. His own name, mangled by Latin translators, became the word algorithm. The hospitals of Baghdad kept records and trained physicians. Paper, a Chinese technology, was manufactured here at industrial scale centuries before Europe learned the trick.
Picture this. You're a bookseller in the Kark market around the year 900. Your shop is one of dozens on this street alone. A customer can buy Euclid in Arabic, Galen in Arabic, star tables computed by astronomers a few districts away. Down the street, a water carrier fills his skins from a public fountain fed by a canal dug before Islam existed. Everything around you, the paper, the bread, the fountain, the peace, runs on systems so old and so reliable that no one thinks about them at all. That is what prosperity does. It makes its own foundations invisible. And here the case turns. Because while the booksellers sold Euclid, the machine beneath them was starting to fail. And the design of the city made that failure very hard to see and very easy to ignore. Follow the evidence piece by piece. First piece. The political center broke early. In 836, the caliphs actually left Baghdad, moved the capital north to Samarra for half a century, largely to put distance between their unruly Turkish guard troops and the city's population. They returned in 892, but the pattern was set. The men who owned the machine could walk away from it. By 945, an Iranian dynasty, the Buyids, took Baghdad outright, and the caliphs, the theoretical center of that perfect circle, became figureheads in their own palace. The Seljuk Turks replaced the Buyids in 1055. For 3 centuries, the ruler every street pointed at ruled almost nothing. Second piece, the water. In 937, during one of the era's endless internal wars, a commander named Ibn Ra'ik deliberately breached the Nahrawan Canal, cut the artery on purpose to flood the path of a rival army. The tactic worked. The repair never fully did. The Great Canal, 300 kilometers of Sasanian engineering, silted and shrank over the following decades, and the farmland it fed shrank with it. Wars kept coming. Dredging budgets kept losing to war budgets. Districts that had paid taxes for 1,000 years went quiet. We don't have to take the chronicler's word for this. In the 1950s and 60s, the University of Chicago archaeologist Robert McCormick Adams surveyed the plains east of Baghdad, the Diyala Basin, the Nahrawan's heartland, mapping and dating hundreds of abandoned settlement sites from potsherds. His conclusion, published in Land Behind Baghdad in 1965, is one of the quiet bombshells of Middle Eastern archaeology. The agricultural collapse of central Iraq was mostly not the Mongols' doing. Vast stretches of the canal network had already failed, and their villages had already emptied in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, while Baghdad still stood, still traded, still looked eternal. On Adams's evidence, the countryside that fed the metropolis had been dying underneath it for 300 years. Third piece, the mind of the city. This one is harder to excavate, but the sources let us try. Baghdad in the 1200s was smaller than at its peak. How much smaller is debated, but it remained the seat of the Caliph. And after the Seljuks faded, the Caliphs even recovered real power over Iraq. The city had survived civil wars, occupations, floods, and fires. Its rulers drew what seemed like the obvious lesson: Baghdad endures. The Caliph al-Nasir, who reigned for an extraordinary 45 years until 1225, rebuilt authority and played rival powers against each other with real skill. His successors inherited the confidence without the skill. Name the phenomenon? Call it the veteran's fallacy. A city that has survived every storm concludes that it is storm-proof, when the honest reading is that it has been lucky, and that each survival has spent resources it no longer has. Baghdad's walls had never been breached by a foreign army. Its people could believe, in 1250, that they lived at the fixed center of the world, because for 5 centuries the map had agreed with them. So here is the design flaw, stated plainly, because we've now seen all 3 of its faces. Baghdad was engineered as a center, hydraulically, politically, psychologically. Its water demanded a strong center to maintain it. Its round geometry preached the center's permanence. Its history seemed to prove it. But the actual center, the Caliphate's real power, had been hollow for centuries. And the machine that made the city possible was running on inherited momentum. The flaw wasn't that Baghdad could be attacked. Every city can be attacked. The flaw was that Baghdad was a system with a single point of failure, inhabited by people whom the system itself had taught that failure was impossible. That's what the round walls kept out: armies. Here's what they kept in: certainty. Quick pause on the case. If you're finding this investigation worthwhile, the channel runs on viewers who subscribe and on patrons who keep the archive open. The join button is below, and every member gets a vote on which case file we open next. Thank you to everyone who has already joined. Now, back to the case, because the pressure is about to arrive, and it is unlike anything the old world has produced. In 1206, a tribal leader in Mongolia took the title Genghis Khan. Within 50 years, his descendants ruled the largest contiguous land empire in history. In 1253, the great Khan Munka gave his brother Hulagu an assignment: take an army west, destroy the assassins of Alamut, and bring the Caliph of Baghdad to submission. If the Caliph refused, destroy him too. Hulagu did nothing quickly and nothing carelessly. His force was enormous. Some historians estimate well over 100,000 men, drawing on contingents from across the empire, though the exact figure is uncertain. What is certain is its composition, because this is not the horde of popular imagination. Hulagu brought Chinese siege engineers, catapult teams, sappers, naphtha throwers, engineers who specialized specifically in rivers and dikes. Read that last item again: engineers who specialized in dikes. The Mongols had studied how Mesopotamia worked. In 1256, Hulagu's army methodically destroyed Alamut, the mountain fortress network that had terrorized the region's rulers for over a century and a half. Then he turned toward Iraq and sent the Caliph a letter demanding submission. The Caliph of Baghdad in 1258 was al-Musta'sim, the 37th Abbasid Caliph, by most accounts a mild man, fond of pigeons and poetry, advised by a court split by rivalry, including a long-running feud around his Shia vizier, Ibn al-Alqami. Some later Sunni chroniclers accused the vizier of secretly inviting the Mongols in. Most modern historians treat that charge as poisoned testimony from a sectarian feud, not established fact. What the sources agree on is what al-Musta'sim actually did, which was, in practical terms, nothing. He sent Hulagu defiant words. He mustered no coalition, strengthened no walls in time, and, several sources report, had allowed the army's rolls to shrink to save money, leaving Baghdad with a fraction of the force its size implied. Why would a ruler facing the Mongols do nothing? The traditional answer is personal weakness, and there's truth in it. But stand where he stood. From inside the palace, inside the round logic of the city, the calculation looked different. Baghdad had stood for 500 years. God's caliph lived here. Muslim armies would surely rise if the city were truly threatened. Every assumption was reasonable. Every assumption was wrong. The design was doing his thinking for him. In November 1257, Hulagu marched. By January 1258, his columns were converging on Baghdad from multiple directions. One force swinging west of the Tigris, the main body approaching from the east through the Diyala plains. Through the dying canal country, the Mongols advanced along the corpse of the Nahrawan system, and it may have made their approach easier. Silted channels and abandoned fields make poor obstacles. The Caliph's army finally rode out to meet the western column near Anbar. On the first day, the Baghdad cavalry actually held its ground, even pushed the Mongols back. That night, the Mongol commanders sent their engineers to the dikes on the Euphrates side and broke them. Water did the rest. The floodwaters poured across the low ground behind the Caliph's camp, cutting the line of retreat, turning the plain to marsh. At dawn, the Mongols attacked, and the army of Baghdad drowned, in significant part, in its own irrigation water. The chroniclers report that only a remnant escaped back to the city. Sit with the irony, because history rarely writes one this clean. The canal network was Baghdad's reason for existing. Control of water was the foundation of 500 years of wealth, and the first decisive blow of the city's destruction was struck by enemy engineers operating Baghdad's own hydraulic machine better than Baghdad did. By mid-January 1258, the city was surrounded. Hulagu's engineers built a palisade and a ditch around the walls, a siege line enclosing the besiegers, a circle around the circle. The catapults began on the eastern walls. The Mongols, short of good stone in the alluvial plain, are reported to have cut palm trees and hauled stones from ruined buildings in the region to feed the barrage. Picture this. You're a watchman on the Ajami Tower of the Eastern Wall in the last days of January. The sound never stops. The crack of stone on brick, day and night, from machines built by men who came from a place you cannot name. Behind you is a city that has never, in its entire history, heard this sound and lost. Below you, the masonry of the tower is beginning to open. You can watch the crack widen by the day, and there is nothing in 5 centuries of the city's memory that tells you what to do about it. By the first days of February, the eastern fortifications were crumbling. On February 4th, Mongol troops took the outer wall. Al-Musta'sim, the man who had ignored every demand, now tried to negotiate everything at once, sending out envoys, then treasure, then finally, on February 10th, 1258, walking out of his city with his sons and his court to surrender in person. Hulagu received him politely. Then he asked the caliph to order the city's population to lay down arms and assemble outside the walls. And the caliph did. On February 13th, the sack began. What followed lasted, by most accounts, somewhere between a week and a month, and it broke the city so completely that we struggle to state its scale honestly. Hulagu himself, in a letter written a few years later to King Louis IX of France, put the dead at 200,000. Persian chroniclers writing under Mongol rule claimed 800,000 or more. Modern historians generally treat the highest figures as impossible for the city's likely population and settle on a range in the low hundreds of thousands, which, at the lower bound, still makes it one of the deadliest urban massacres in pre-modern history. The honest statement is this: we do not know the number, and every source that gives one had a reason to inflate or deflate it. We know the event by its silence, by how little of the city's own testimony survived to argue. The mosques burned, the palaces burned, the Bait al-Hikmah and the city's famed libraries were destroyed. Later writers described the Tigris running black with the ink of books thrown into the water. And while that image comes from chroniclers writing after the fact and may be legend, the loss beneath the legend was real. Centuries of accumulated scholarship, much of it existing in a handful of copies, went out of the world in a week. Al-Musta'sim watched some portion of this before he died. The most widely reported account, and details vary across the sources, is that on February 20th, the Mongols rolled the last reigning Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad in a carpet and trampled him under horses, honoring their custom against spilling royal blood on the ground. Other accounts say he was locked in his treasury to starve among the gold he had refused to spend on soldiers. The stories differ on the method. They agree on the meaning. The center of the circle was gone. And now, the verdict. Because the question we opened with was not who destroyed Baghdad, we know who. The question was what design flaw killed it, and why this blow, unlike every blow before, was final. Cities recover from massacres. It is one of the grim constants of history. Rome was sacked and refilled. Delhi was sacked and refilled. Baghdad itself had absorbed catastrophe before. What a city cannot recover from is the loss of its reason to exist. Baghdad's reason was the hydraulic machine, and by 1258, that machine needed exactly what the sack removed: a wealthy central authority with the will to spend generations rebuilding canals. The Mongols didn't just kill people, they decapitated the only institution that could have restarted the system, and they folded Iraq into an empire ruled from Iran, for which Baghdad was now a provincial border town, not a center of anything. Adams's survey data shows what happened next. The countryside kept emptying. The Nahrawan region never came back. Baghdad survived as a city. People lived there continuously. But the metropolis of 1 million was gone. And it stayed gone until the 20th century. Ibn Battuta, visiting in 1327, found a town living among ruins too large for it. So here is the verdict of this investigation, and it is a reading of the evidence, not a revealed truth, but the evidence points one way. Baghdad was not killed in 13 days in 1258. Baghdad was a city whose design demanded a permanent, powerful center, and whose actual center had been dying for 300 years, while the design kept promising everyone that it couldn't. The canals silted, the caliphs weakened, the certainty held. The Mongols did not break the machine. They arrived at the end of its long shutdown and switched off the lights. That, at least, is what the evidence suggests. The potsherds in the Diyala plain as much as the chronicles. One last walk before we close the file. The round city itself. Al-Mansur's perfect circle is gone so completely that archaeologists still debate its exact footprint under modern West Baghdad. But the idea in its geometry is not gone at all. Every city you have ever lived in runs on systems designed to be invisible. Water treatment, power grids, food logistics, the quiet institutional machinery that dredges the modern canals. And every one of those cities contains people, including you, including me, whose entire experience says the lights come on, the water flows, the center holds. It always has. Our confidence, like Baghdad's, is not evidence. It is a design feature. And the maintenance bill is always real, whether or not anyone is paying it. The City of Peace believed it was the fixed center of the world. It was, instead, the most spectacular proof we have that centers are built, and what is built must be maintained, and what is not maintained is already falling. No matter how round the walls, no matter how bright the golden age, no matter how certain the people walking streets that all point forever at a dome that is no longer there. Every fallen city is a case file. Which one should I open next? Tell me in the comments, and if this investigation earned it, subscribe, because the next city died of something quieter, and the evidence is even stranger.